something kept coming up in our research, which was the importance of struggle and challenge. Now, and this was happening in a world of positive psychology, the happiness movement, which is all like happiness is, well, I mean, if you look at the happiness movement, there's one message, which is positive emotion is good and good for you, negative emotion, bad and bad for you. Like that's the message. But what kept coming up was the importance of, to be crass, like getting your ass kicked and having struggle and having really challenging things. And so we decided to do this experiment, and we interviewed people and said, all right, if you look at the goal setting process, if you can break it down into three big parts, like you set the goal, you strive towards the goal, and then you achieve the goal. And we said to people, like, what's the most fulfilling part of this process? And everyone looked at us like we're an idiot, and they went, well, of course it's the achieve. Like the only reason I set the goal is to achieve the goal. Like I'm after the result. But what we discovered, which you just alluded to then, was a thing called the completion myth. And that is where we dramatically overestimate how good we're going to feel once we achieve something. And so what happens is once we achieve a goal, we have a period of elation, but then it's very quickly followed by a period of flatness where we just kind of feel lost. Now, this was universal. This was, and I'm talking gold medalists that came back from the Olympic Games, and we interviewed them, and they said, "Man, I just thought it would make more of a difference to my life, or I thought I'd feel better." And they came back and went, "Oh, I had a real flat period." And even I had this conversation with Tony Hsieh, who founded Zappos, who's no longer with us, which is a huge shame. But what he was saying is when he sold his first company, I think he sold it to Microsoft for like 200 mil. I said, man, when you got the check, actually, he was saying, my accountant called me and said the money's in your account. And I said, how'd you feel? He said, I just felt really empty, because what I loved was building the business.
Right.
And he said, I already had enough money. I didn't need more. And so anyway, this thing was universal. And we then did an experiment where we got people to actually go through that process real time. So they had to set a goal, they had to work towards it, they had to achieve it. And the thing about humans is we suck at recalling how we felt in the past, and we're terrible at predicting how we're going to feel into the future. So we got them to do it real time, and they had to do diary study entries where they went, oh, okay, I'm working on this, here's how I feel, here's my level of fulfillment. And what we discovered is the most fulfilling part of a goal is the strive. It's when we're doing the work, it's when we're working towards it. And weirdly, the moments that were most fulfilling had the highest level of challenge and struggle attached to them. And the reason for this is that those moments require us to be courageous and to evolve. And what we discovered is people need courage and evolution like they crave love and connection. So that's the whole piece about Strive, is how has our relationship with challenge and struggle changed over the last 10 years? And how can it be more functional?
It's fascinating because you hear you made a really interesting point at the beginning of this conversation, which was around and it was funny. I was only having a conversation with some colleagues recently around this delicate balance between good research and your ability to communicate it, right? What you were saying before, and if you look at sort of the catchy but what people might say has less essence to it is this it's not about the destination, it's about the journey sort of thing. Oh, that's easy to say when I'm going through this painful experience and all those sorts of things, but it's fascinating that you've then put a bit of substance behind it, with this research. So how then, if we're to really test the boundaries of this and we go, okay, there are some really unpleasant, I think to myself, in my most recent studies, I set a goal for myself of a certain time that I wanted to achieve in the marathon, because it resulted in a certain sort of little jacket that I get to keep collecting dust in the spare room for the rest of my life, which I've got in there. I achieved the goal as a spoiler. But I can think back to that time and I can think to myself, okay, Adam's point around this makes a lot of sense to me. Getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and doing those 20 or 30K runs every day, and working towards that goal was, a moment that I was feeling the best, that, I was most proud of my achievements, all those sorts of things. But what about like, is there a tipping point where that struggle is no longer fun, is no longer okay, is no longer courageous? Is there a tipping point? Maybe it's not so much working towards a goal as it is, continuous stress. Something maybe like single parenthood, very rewarding, but a massive challenge that would be helpful if others were around to help.
Yeah, look, I think going back to your point, the struggle is never fun. Like, it really isn't. I mean, if it's struggle, and what we talk about in the book is different types of struggle, and you can go from trauma, which, we're not advocating in any way,
Yeah.
to, like just really hard, devastating things that happen to us but aren't trauma, and then all the way through to growth-centric struggle, which is what's an example that's not fun? I got a 13-year-old daughter, and far out, her and I are clashing over her phone. So she's not allowed on social media, but she has a phone that she uses to catch public transport. But, she just talks to her friends the whole time. And I'm like, you got to put your phone away. So we're having these arguments, right? It's a struggle. I'm not enjoying it. It's horrible. But what it requires from me is to evolve the way I communicate and to evolve our relationship to come up with a functional response to that. Now, what we're also not saying is you want to be constantly in struggle. Like, you want to pull yourself out to, and it goes back to that original piece of, do you have recovery? Like, I mean, God, in your world, you would meet some really driven, high net worth individuals who are flogging themselves, and they get to a point and they just burn out so hard. Like, even we've been doing this research on burnout, and I was talking to a guy the other day, and he said he'd burn out so hard that he had a new child. And he said, I'm literally holding this kid and I can't feel joy. Like, I'm just so done.
Wow.
And this is something we want to avoid. So we want to stretch ourselves. We want to be in struggle. But at the same time, we want to recover. We want to do things to renew. We want to remove that struggle and have periods where we're not pushing ourselves that hard.